Ooh. Good afternoon, everyone. How are we today?
I was saying that we are great, fantastic.
Fabulous, fabulous. It's great once we're ready to go. We're ready to go. All right, awesome. So welcome to our webinar. Welcome to our amazing webinar today. And thank you so much for being with us. It is just a pleasure to be here with this amazing team headed up by the wonderful, the gorgeous, beautiful, and fabulous ladies here. So let me tell you, this powerhouse team here, headed up by Georgia Gibson Henlin at the Privacy Legal Management Consultants Limited with her beautiful associates over there. And you notice everybody is wearing blue, unified and united mentally, physically, and in every way. It is such a beautiful thing to have these powerful ladies. And you know, they're wearing blue. So they're calm and powerful and very confident. And so it's just amazing to have everybody here. Kelly Ray Campbell, Cherie Roden. Thank you so much. I'm Lacia Holmes Graham, and I am the Customer Success Manager at Inova Solutions. And I am also heading up the local team here for Inova. I've been working here for 14 years in ICT, and I have had the pleasure of hosting this event on prioritizing privacy with an amazing chief privacy officer, right? You have to understand, to be managing privacy in this day and age right now is serious business. And we have this great panel focusing on that initiative, not only for Jamaica, but for the world, because let's face it, data and privacy is something that all of us should be thinking about, not just for ourselves, but for entities, for our children, for the businesses that we serve and we work in. And so it is my esteemed pleasure to just introduce again Georgia Gibson Henlin, who heads up as the managing partner of PLMC, and her beautiful associates there in lovely blue, and Cherie Roden, as well as Kelly Ray Campbell. We are just so delighted to be here. And I want to introduce a wonderful video that we're going to have from the Honorable Darrell Vaz, who is the Minister of Science, Energy and Technology. And he is going to be speaking on where we are when it comes to data and privacy protection, and where we are when it focuses on the Data Protection Act, how much work we're doing as a country and as a nation in that area, and what it is that we need to be focusing on.
Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to thank the Privacy and Legal Management Consultants Limited for the invitation to address you at this Prioritizing Privacy Conference. This conference is timely as we engage more with the digital space and seek to transform our country to a digital society. I take note of your theme, Jamaica's Data Protection Framework. Are we there yet? Permit me to highlight the progress that Jamaica is making in strengthening the policy, legislative, regulatory, and institutional framework in support of data protection. In this era, the existence of modern and robust legislation is integral to safeguarding our citizens' data and creating an enabling environment through which we can navigate the digital space. In 2020, Jamaica joined a growing list of countries to pass the data protection legislation. The Data Protection Act 2020 recognizes that personal data is an individual's identity and therefore it must be protected. The Act seeks to define the general principles for the treatment of personal data and provide for transparent oversight that will enable the public and private sectors to strengthen protection of personal data. Jamaica's reason for promulgating the data protection legislation includes the advancement in technology and the increasing ability to process, store, and distribute data, the increase in electronic commerce. We are working closely with the International Telecommunications Union for drafting of notices, orders, and regulations for the Data Protection Act 2020. I'm pleased to report that the ITU consultant is on board and a draft has been prepared for consideration. Ladies and gentlemen, the Data Protection Act also makes provisions for the Office of the Information Commissioner, the OIC. The OIC will be led by an Information Commissioner and has responsibility to, among other things, monitor compliance with the Data Protection Act and regulations. We have laid the foundation for the OIC to carry out its work with the legislative framework that has been established. Additionally, the Commissioner has been recruited and will commence work on December 1st, 2021. Jamaica's transition to a digital society will also be bolstered by the ICT Authority. With the passage of the Information and Communication Technology Act 2019, the ICT Authority will allow for greater streamlining of the ICT processes in the public sector as we transition to a digital society. Ladies and gentlemen, the creation of a technology-enabled society is an integral component of our Vision 2030 National Development Plan. As we work towards that goal, we are cognizant that data protection safeguards are needed for individual businesses and the entire nation. So are we there yet? We are well on the way. We have made good strides as evidenced by the policy, legislative, regulatory, and institutional frameworks that we have laid. I want to emphasize that data protection is not just about having an enabling environment. It is a culture that we are trying to develop in our country. As such, public awareness raising initiatives will be a significant function of the OIC. For so many of us, personal data is treated with scant regard, but safeguarding and protecting your data is critical in an age when data is the new gold. I want to encourage all Jamaicans that while we implement the necessary legislation and regulations to safeguard data, you must also do your part to ensure that your data is protected. Ladies and gentlemen, I wish for you the very best for this conference as you turn the spotlight on data protection in the information age. Thank you.
I just really want to thank the Honorable Darrell Vaz, Member of Parliament, for his speech there. And I just want to highlight the importance of the fact that he said that sometimes we treat our data with scant regard, and the importance now of having this amazing opportunity. This conference is something that people pay thousands, hundreds of thousands of US for, training their staff and team to understand the importance of why we need to take data seriously, but not only the data itself, but the handling of the data and the metadata as well. And so having these lovely persons here highlighting why, how, who, what, and where, and also when is so important. And I want to consider yourselves lucky, blessed even, that we are here providing you this amazing conference today, right? We really want to highlight that. Another point that I want to touch on with the minister's speech was about the fact that we have to have a culture of how we handle data. The culture of how we handle data, and I do want to definitely big up the team at PLMC the culture associated with how they approach the legality of how dealing with the data, but the blend of the ICT enablement that is needed to move that forward. And so I definitely want to just hand over to the wonderful managing partner and her lovely associates as they introduce the next speaker.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here today. My name is Shamanice Melissa Arnold, and I am a governance, risk, and compliance specialist at PLMC. I mean, who is PLMC? What do we do? You're wondering, who are these people talking to us today? Why should we be here? But let me tell you, we are an all-woman team of governance, risk, and compliance specialists in Jamaica. Our goal is to increase awareness and compliance with data protection and privacy standards in our very own country. I mean, these concepts are relatively new to many people. And in doing this, we operationalize privacy in organizations of all sizes. We offer trainings and webinars such as this one here today. And I mean, we are here to give you a taste of what our offered services are. Now, when you saw our agenda, you saw privacy governance, and you saw the speaker as M. Georgia Gibson Henlin. So I am going to introduce her now. Who is M. Georgia Gibson Henlin? M. Georgia Gibson Henlin is our PLMC. She's our Chief Governance, Risk, and Compliance Specialist. She is also a certified information privacy professional in Europe. She's a certified information privacy manager. She is also the co-chair of the IAPP KnowledgeNet Caribbean chapter. And I mean, she has been in the tech space probably from before I was born. So ladies and gentlemen, please welcome M. Georgia Gibson Henlin.
Thank you so much, Shavanice, for that very bright and bubbly welcome. And I hope that I can live up to the expectations that you have created by the nature of your welcome. Before I start, however, I know that they will be introduced, but I want to thank Lacia for at the last minute accepting to join this team to moderate on our behalf, and Kelly Ray and Cherie, they work with me as well on the Caribbean KnowledgeNet, and in fact, Kelly Ray is the co-chair. And our role actually is to broaden, as IAPP, is to broaden the knowledge in terms of privacy in the Caribbean region. And I do notice that I actually see some of our Caribbean friends online. So allow me to commence my presentation. I'm sure that I actually know that Shavanice has basically whet your appetite for the presentation. There you go. So I'm assuming that everyone can see my screen. So Shavanice was very bubbly, and you got a sense of why we are doing this from the minister. But there's another aspect to why we have taken the approach to talk about privacy governance. There is actually a poll that we wanted to launch. I don't know if now is a good time, Shavanice, to launch that poll before I start speaking. Is everybody seeing the poll to vote? So the question in that poll is, have you ever attended a presentation or received training in relation to Jamaica's Data Protection Act requirements? And it's you can answer yes, no, not sure. Not sure if you can vote more than once. Not seeing anybody voting. So I'm going to assume that persons are not seeing the poll, and then I'll continue. But the whole point of the poll, though, and that particular question was to kind of get a sense of what the audience is, because we make assumptions about what people know or how people approach things. And so we have made an assumption that in our audience that most persons would already have had some exposure to the law as it relates to the data protection. And so we wanted to deal with it from a different tack, which is to say, we have heard so much from several private sector entities which offer similar services, persons in the tech space, and sometimes through the debate that has been taking place in Parliament, we've heard so much about the Data Protection Act and what it intends to do, and how our lives will be changed in terms of our respect for information and so on. So what we want to do by this presentation, and most of the presentations that we intend to do in the coming months, is to shift the discussion from the law and to take you to the point where we discuss with you, how are you going to comply with this law? Now, we have been giving presentations on this along with a number of our colleagues, probably for over 2 years now. And at that time, when you ask us at all, any of us, and you say to us, when is the Data Protection Act coming into force? We say things like, well, we don't know, or it is passed, but not yet in force, or we are not hearing anything about the Office of the Information Commissioner. But now today, you have heard from the minister that by the 1st of December 2021, we will be having, or we would have moved in an advanced way to another step in terms of implementation. And I think people need now to be very curious as to, well, how do we do it? So even, especially because nobody answered my poll, I will use this opportunity now to just give you a little background on why we talk about privacy. So we use the terms interchangeably, data privacy and data protection. And I suppose for those who are late to the area, it's okay, but it is still important to understand that data privacy, the rights that we are talking about, are basically a human right. We are born with them. And in fact, they are protected by our Constitution as informational privacy under the Charter of Fundamental Rights and Freedoms. I think that all Jamaicans would be aware of the NIDS case. That was part of the reason that it was the NIDS, the original NIDS, the first NIDS, NIDS 1 was struck down because the court was of the view that it did not appreciate that privacy or informational privacy is a human right. So what is data protection? Data protection is about maintaining the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of personal data and those of our customers and our employees, for example. And the concept or the whole idea of dealing with data protection came about. And it's amazing in a sense how once we would talk about this in the abstract. So we talk about the rise in computer processing. That is what caused it in Europe. They were there long ago, long before Jamaica thought about it. Once you entered Europe at all, you would always hear about the European Data Protection Directive because they are very steeped in this whole concept of privacy. And data protection laws and regulations were developed there with a view to protecting information in the same way as it crossed borders in the context of trade. They wanted to ensure that the data subject, for everywhere that the data subject information goes, it is wrapped in this protection of the human right as at its origin. And the real concern was the ability of the rising computing power to exploit the data in a way that was unfair and did not take into account that the data is actually owned by an individual. And so we used to talk about that in the abstract, but you now know that everyone talks about privacy, about companies sharing information. And we have seen as well that since COVID-19, we have been migrating more and more into the cloud against, I suppose, our better judgment, against our will. And so it has come home to the point where we now need to understand the power that we have over our information, and that this data protection law is an essential piece of legislation to assist with the protection of that information. What we like to call it at PLMC, we like to call it PIRO, people, information, responsibilities, and obligations. That's what we like to call it about when we talk about information, because it's all about people first. So in a nutshell,
what is protected? Personal data and sensitive personal data. This is any information relating to an identified or identifiable natural person. The data subject. A data subject is one who can be identified, directly or indirectly, by reference to an identifier. This can be their name, identification number, or location data. It can also include one or more factors specific to aspects of their identity, like their physical identity, shown in a photograph, or their economic identity, as in a record of their income. Sensitive personal data may include their racial origin or religious beliefs. All this is personal data and sensitive personal data that must be protected. What is protected?
So in a nutshell, that is what is being protected. That is what we are talking about. And that is why for every presentation that I do, I tend to remind companies that even though they have in place a robust cybersecurity program, it is not the same thing as talking about data protection, because data protection is dealing with a discrete set of information, and that is personal information. So you have all sorts of information that flows through your organization on a daily basis. But what is really protected is the personal information, and you need to take directed steps, focused steps to protect that. Now, why does it matter? So we spoke about the fact that there's a law, and of course the law is there and the law is going to have sanctions. But is that the only reason that organizations are establishing their privacy program? Is that the only reason you would think of wanting to protect your implementing a privacy program? The answer is no, because what you will see is that, and even though the recent Facebook incident was an infrastructure issue, an infrastructure failure, where their network went down, you can see the kind of reputational harm, in a sense, even if it is for a day, that Facebook suffered, with people running away from Facebook, wanting to be as far as possible from Facebook, or because they were concerned initially as to whether this was a data loss. But even if we do not consider that was so, we know enough about data loss and data breaches. We had our own discussions around a data incident, jam COVID, and we saw the discussion around that, the concerns and the questions relating to consumer trust of the COVID-19 app after the incident took place. Now consider if that were to happen to your business. So we say that privacy matters because it is more than compliance. It improves brand reputation. It tells people that you care about their information and that you will manage it effectively when it comes into your possession. So an effective privacy program will always ensure that proper security measures are in place to ensure that your data is not lost, that risks are mitigated. And as your organization improves its privacy compliance, it will see its brand reputation improving, and people will make decisions on the basis of of how they think you stand in relation to the handling of their information. As long as they have choices, it is important to bear in mind that there is this thing and this comparison that they can make, and they can make a choice between you and another business based on how you treat with their data. And they have the backing of not only the Data Protection Act, but of the Constitution and the knowledge that this information belongs to them. Now, again, I just spoke about Facebook a week ago, but when I talk about misuse of data and we talk about sanctions, we know that, for example, in 2018, Facebook had shared personal data and they were actually fined $5 billion in penalty. What we know though, in relation to Jamaica and basically globally, and why I am pleased to see the number of persons who are here and who appreciate that we are in a different place, is that COVID-19 has indeed brought a great attention to privacy within many organizations. And relying on this IAPP FTI annual governance report in 2020, it says that more than 40% of the respondents reported that privacy has become more important in the wake of COVID-19. And I'm going to show you some statistics in order for you to understand. And I'm going to give you what I think is a wake-up call, because even though I tend to do this every day, every time when I read, I tend to find an additional gem that I can pass on to people to say why it is that you need to lay your hands on a privacy professional at this point in order to kickstart your privacy program. So this data, again, I'm crediting to the IAPP FTI 2020 governance report. And what it has said is that since COVID-19, 49% of the organizations interviewed collect health status information from their employees. Temperature, 37%. Personal history of travel, 35%. COVID-19 results, 30%. Contact tracing information, 29%. Antibody test result, 6%. And persons who haven't done any of the above is in the bottom percentile, which is 24%, 8% onshore, and 2% other. But why am I talking about this, and what did I discover when I was looking at this information? Because ordinarily I would be saying to people, the issue of whether you appoint a data protection officer or not is really one for you because it is optional. Now, since almost everybody is collecting sensitive personal data or COVID-19 information, which is regarded as sensitive personal data under the Act, what it means is that even small businesses are now going to have to consider that they will need to appoint a data protection officer, because prior to COVID-19, I suppose it was mainly healthcare professionals who collected health information. But now, because we have all of these disaster risk management acts, everybody has to be observing the protocols, ensuring that people are abiding by the protocols. You come to work, there's hardly a place that you go to nowadays that your temperature is not taken. If you travel and you come back, that your travel history is not recorded and you're not required to stay home. And if there's a suspicion that you have COVID-19, then there's this contact tracing. All of that is health information that even the smallest of organizations, if you are compliant, you're collecting it. And if you're collecting it, it therefore means that you have to now be more focused on obligations that ordinarily you would not have had under the Act. And one of the big ones would be the data protection officer, because a data protection officer was mandatory for a public authority, for persons or entities that process or intend to process sensitive personal data or data relating to criminal convictions, or someone who processes data on a large scale. So I was saying to small and medium enterprises that or some specialized areas, like, for example, probably a small customs broker and so on, one might have said, oh, I don't fall within that. So I don't have to get into that expense of trying to appoint a data protection officer. But know that you are collecting sensitive personal data, then you would need to appoint a data protection officer. In fact, why this is also important, there's another reason why this is important, because when you are collecting data generally, or set that which is now personal data, one of the elements is consent. However, when it is sensitive personal data, it has to be written consent. How are you going to demonstrate that you got consent, whether it is the mandatory written consent or the consent? It must be that you have a structured policy and program in place in order to do so. So that is the reason that we are here talking to you about some of the things that you may take for granted that now require you to take a strategic approach and to plan for compliance with the privacy framework that the legislation has set up for us. So you will see now that I've tried to put in red what an effective and successful privacy program would look like. It talks about proactive strategies. So a proactive strategy, for example, is like attending sessions like these. A proactive strategy would be starting before December 1st, 2021. Mind you, at December 1st, 2021, we know that it won't be up and running, but we know that they are now much closer. The government is now much closer to implementing than when it was passed in June or July of 2020. And so you have to be proactive about it. You have to be persuasive about implementing this. And this political survey here is not talking about politicians. You need to find a way to get buy-in and to get people on board in relation to the implementation of the program. You have to be adaptable, and adaptability is important because of the very point that I just made, because initially you were there thinking, in other words, it's not a static, it's not static because the laws are constantly changing. If the law is not changing, your environment is changing, because the example that I just gave you of the requirements for a data protection officer in the context of COVID-19, it's not because the law has changed, it's because the environment has changed, which requires you to do certain things that trigger the application of the law to you. Now, just a broad overview of what your privacy program governance is like. And when we talk about governance, what are we really talking about? We are talking about a whole framework of policies and systems that you will use to guide your organization into this process of protecting the personal data of your customers and employees. Privacy governance will have components that ensure that the organization is aligned with the privacy laws and regulations and enables it to meet its objectives and goals in the protection of the information. So I like to use the analogy of corporate governance, because before the Enron scandal, for those of you who are as old as I am, before that scandal in the United States, there was not a lot of emphasis placed on documenting the obligations and responsibilities of directors to their shareholders and so on, because so the law was always there. Our Companies Act is from 1948. How much more so that's an old one, in the United States. The law was there, everything was there in place, but there was nothing in place to hold it together and to ensure that people observe these rules, and it ended up causing a financial crash. And I think that financial crash reverberated globally and had a knock-on effect coming right down to Jamaica. And it's the same thing that will happen in the context of Jamaica if we do not get to the point where we take seriously, each individual takes seriously that we need to implement this privacy program. And a critical part of that is the fact that, bear in mind that I started out by indicating that trade is an important component or an important reason that people implement these privacy programs. So for example, if our systems are deemed to be inadequate, there are investments that we could get as a country, that you could get as a company, that you will not get if you do not put your privacy program in place. So the structure of your privacy program, when you're finished, should look something like this. And I'm going to try to deep dive a little bit into some of this. I did say to someone that it's a high level deep dive. And if anyone wants us to come and do a more intensive program with them, certainly we can do that, but we can't go into all of the areas that we would be required, or it's necessary for you to know. We found as well in implementing the program for others that we might have started out and saying, okay, and it's not that we are wrong. We start out by saying, okay, let's just do the data mapping first. But we realize that we can't do it in silos. We have to be doing the assessments and the policies and the data mapping and everything at the same time, while being guided by this governance program, starting out with the mission, the company mission and vision. So in the end, this is what how it will flow. And the metrics there will show that it must be measurable. Why do we want to talk about metrics and the fact that it must be measurable? Because the act itself sets up what we call an accountability framework. An accountability framework is one that is an action-oriented framework. It's not about saying that you are complying. It's being able to demonstrate by measurement that you are complying. So in kickstarting your privacy program, I think I heard the minister talk about a culture of privacy. You have to do that. You have to create a culture of privacy in your organization when you're implementing your governance framework in the same way that you deal with corporate obligations. The privacy governance speaks to teams, tools, strategy, and structure that focuses an organization on its privacy obligations. You have to consider the scope of your privacy program. And when I talk about scope, what do I mean? What I mean is which laws are going to be included or considered when you're implementing your privacy program. So we say that we are right here in Jamaica, so only the Jamaican Data Protection Act applies. But if you recall, when I started out, I made mention of the fact that there were these EU directives in the EU for as long as I can remember being in this space, they were there. And what actually caught our attention was the GDPR. The GDPR caught our attention because of what we call its extraterritorial scope. So to the extent that you process EU data subjects information, then your scope cannot only be Jamaica. Your scope will have to include some references and some principles that ensure that you also observe and comply with the GDPR. And then there's the California Consumer Privacy Act, which is also another long arm data protection statute. And uniformly across the globe, you'll find that most of them are like that. So when we talk about scope, you have to take into consideration what privacy laws is your organization required to comply with. It talks about, you have to look at your privacy goals. Your privacy goals always turn and center on ensuring that that people believe in the program, believe that you care about their information and that you're projecting to them that they can trust you with their information because you care about it. You have to look also at the business objectives and goals. And so it requires consideration of the business sector that you are in, the requirements of that type, that particular business sector, the type of information that is collected. How do you ordinarily store the information or collect the information, and for how long? And you then have to consider that you have to identify the source types and uses of the personal information. And of course, I had indicated which laws apply. And one of the unique things which I learned from a colleague just 2 weeks ago, I think I heard it, but when she said it, it had much more force because of her own intimacy with the law is the fact that it is not, although we say you protect, we are talking about natural persons' data, you are under an obligation in Jamaica for a period, I believe, of 30 years after death to make sure that you manage and keep that data secure. So that is why you have to have this privacy governance, so you are not caught off guard and you are not dealing with the thing ad hoc. Well, so we are talking about privacy and it sounds new and it is indeed new. So as you begin to kickstart your privacy program, one of the questions that we often get is, where is the privacy function to be located on your organizational chart? We know that we have had people who say, oh, it must be in IT and so on. But the reality is that even though privacy is in and of itself a separate area of professional area, what we know is that it has legal underpinnings because of the various laws. So 54% of persons surveyed by the IAPP Consumer Privacy Report say it should be in legal. 18% says that it should be in information security. 15% say that you should have a privacy and data protection division. Some say, 13% say it should be regulatory compliance, 9% say it's information technology, 6% say that it's corporate ethics, and 19% just say basically anywhere. But you have to make that decision for yourself. Speaking for myself as a person with legal background, I believe that legal must play an important role in the development of your privacy program, in the development and management of your privacy programs. Having decided where your privacy program is going to be sitting, what the scope of your privacy program will take in, then you have to establish a privacy strategy. And a privacy strategy is really trying to get every single person that interact with the information over which you have control, is getting them on board, because you are saying to them why. You're answering the question for them why. So you have to create the buy-in for your shareholders. You have to create the buy-in for vendors. Vendors can be a little bit unwieldy and difficult to deal with, because sometimes they don't see why they have to be part of your privacy program. But so you have to create that buy-in by letting them know that the ultimate responsibility, certainly under the Jamaican law, is for you as a data controller. There are no obligations in Jamaica on the data processor. So the way that the data controller mirrors those obligations or ensure compliance is to mirror its own obligations in the contracts that it has with those who it hires to process information or have other relationships with. Internal staff, even based on my own experience in terms of assisting with the implementation of some programs, what you find with the internal staff is that I think we talk about tech literacy or digital literacy. Well, for them, it's data privacy or data protection literacy, in the sense that they have other things that are more important to them. They have other things that they would like to be doing and that they think are more important. So it's a tough task that you have. It's a tall order, as I said at the beginning, for you to go in. And that is what it means when it talks about political savvy. How are you going to get these people to understand the why of your privacy program? And that is why you need to have established this privacy strategy. What you will find as well, and one of the most important buy-ins that you definitely need to get is your C-suite and executive management in terms of championing the privacy program, because it's a big spend and they are the ones who control the purse. And so they are the ones who need to understand, probably even more than the support staff. I mean, everybody has to understand, but if the spend is not there, it's not gonna happen. So you need a division. And worst, if you're a group of companies, it's trying to get that alignment across your group of companies. If your group of companies is local, that's one issue. But when your group of companies are located globally or regionally, then you have additional challenges. So what you'll find is that it is not a one side fitting all. So a big part of your strategy then is really about bringing the various stakeholders together in their little categories or buckets of what they are responsible for in the business. And so what we think, generally speaking, your privacy team or program might very well look like is something like what you're seeing on the screen. The privacy team that is in charge, the functional team, and then I'll show you a little flow chart or cycle that show how they interrelate with each other and they communicate with each other. So you see that it's important to have IT on board, legal, HR, finance, operations and procurement, and marketing. Operations and procurement, I presume, would be in the nature of when you're acquiring new products and services, and what needs to be in that contract once it interfaces with your personal information. So you can see from all that I'm saying that it is not a cursory approach. It's not one of those things that comes into your organization and you say, okay, let so and so take care of itself or anything like that. It is something that you have to embrace and be very structured about. You can see here how, and again, this is just a very high level team credited this kind of structure again to the IAPP. Now, once you decide on your scope and your strategy and your team, one of the things now that you have to do is coming up with your privacy vision and mission. And we are all familiar with mission statements and vision statements. It's a big part of strategy sessions when we have our strategic meetings year on year. But same thing for privacy. You have to have as a big part of your strategy, your approach to privacy, the understanding of the objectives, and getting the approval of C-suite. Once all of these things are in place, we know now that the privacy program has to be built on a foundation, on a firm foundation. And so you have to look to for examples and precedents of different kinds of frameworks that are out there that can assist you in fashioning your privacy program. So you have some that are, well, we don't have any locally, so we would have to be looking overseas to whether internationally in terms of the OECD principles and practices, or fair information practice for principles and standards that will help us to implement the choice and consent and data subject rights and the laws and so on as are required by our act. So those will provide the examples that will help you to fashion the structure of your program and to fashion how your program is going to look and to get it to filter down to others. You will see that you will determine as well whether you can have privacy management solutions that will give you all of these principles, standards, and so on in a package, in a software package, and so on. So your implementation roadmap will always ensure that the program sits on a firm foundation. And what really distinguishes your privacy strategy, which we spoke about earlier, from your privacy framework, is that the privacy strategy answers the question as to why. Why are we doing this? Why does it matter? Whereas the privacy framework answers the question of what form or structure will our privacy program take, and what frameworks will provide the implementation roadmaps. And as I say, that you do have, and that's the whole point, although this presentation is not on behalf of the IAPP, but that's the whole point of the Knowledge Net in Jamaica, and why we have been asked to chair it, is so that we can bring together the privacy professionals so that we can have a shared understanding of all of the learning that is out there to ensure that our robust privacy infrastructure can be available to companies who are implementing their privacy programs. And I think that on Friday, we'll be having a networking session after the session on Friday at 6 p.m. we'll be having a networking session with the IAPP persons who are interested in joining IAPP, and we'll be looking forward to you joining that. But that's the whole point of it, because we have to exist in an environment where, even though we compete, we recognize that the trade rides on a good privacy program. And so your ability to trade and invest globally, and sometimes probably even locally, will ride on the nature of the professionals that you hire to implement your privacy program. And so that collaboration, I think, was a good initiative on the part of the IAPP. And for those here who are interested, we'll see you at the end of the next session. So what does the framework guide? Once you have that framework in place that I just discussed in terms of enhancement, in terms of the structure and determining which policies, principles, laws, or tools you are going to use, once you take that structured approach to your privacy program, you will find that it enhances your compliance because it reduces data loss. It increases your market value and your reputational value. It reduces risk, and it helps you to implement compliance metrics, because you'll be benchmarking. When you set your framework, you are benchmarking it against international or global standards, or standards that are in other countries. I was looking, for example, at a World Bank privacy policy, and we know that World Bank does business across the world, and their issue was, how do they do a privacy policy for each country in which they do business, or is it that they are going to do a global privacy policy that takes into account the requirements in each of the countries in which they operate? And they decided to use a global privacy policy. And if I were to use an analogy, therefore, that is what companies need to do. Am I going to have a system or a policy that is local to my branch, or am I going to have a global framework and policy and so on? So one of the things, for example, that would come within your framework is with the kinds of organizational and technical measures that you may want to implement. And the reason that this is important is that in the Data Protection Act, it doesn't say it doesn't use those words, but it expects that organization will treat with personal information by default. So it talks about privacy by design. Your system must be designed to protect privacy, and by default, it must protect privacy. It's not a situation where you opt in, or you say you're doing one thing, and then you say you tell people you're doing one thing, and then you do something else. Once you have dealt with your strategy, your framework, and your scope, you have to ask yourself, what governance model do I want? And here I've just placed on the screen quickly, because I think my time has been up for about 10 minutes now. So I'm going to try to wrap up as quickly as possible. But here again, you'll have to decide, is your model going to be centralized, where everything filters down? Is it going to be decentralized, distributed across various teams, or is it going to be a hybrid model? Most people suggest that the hybrid model is the best. Your data protection, your privacy program is going to be very policy driven. So what you will find, we spoke about needs earlier. So here's an example where maybe you are using a biometrics to measure attendance. So you'll have to have a policy around that. You have to have a policy around technical security, who has access to what, user data, and so on. Everything will require a policy at the end of the day. You will have to consider as well about the appointment, as I said earlier, of the DPO. And training and awareness is one of those things that you're going to find that is ongoing. You're not going to get rid of Georgia today. You're going to call me all the time, or someone like me, because you can't get rid of training and awareness. So not necessarily me, but someone else. I'd much prefer if it's me, but the point is, training and awareness is something that you're going to need all the time to ensure that you are able to demonstrate to our Office of Information Commissioner that you are a compliant entity and that it's always in your DNA. So what kinds of training can you have? You can have training in relation to privacy standards, privacy settings, and your privacy obligations. In terms of implementation, what has been the level of difficulty? Personally, I've found that it can be a little bit challenging because sometimes I feel like it's like people see it like one of the little annoying, intangible things that lawyers do, and they can't understand. It's not like you go to the doctor, you feel unwell, doctor give you an injection, or you get some prescription, you feel better. That's how this feels to them, like the annoying little lawyer who collects their money and they can't quite see what is done. However, given that it is something that you're required to do, it's important for you to start early. So based on the statistics that and this survey that was done again by the IAPP FTI Governance Report 2020, this is using the California Consumer Privacy Act as an example on a scale of 1 to 10, where 0 means not difficult and 10 is extremely difficult. For data mapping, 5.6% of the respondents, well, 5.6 on the scale, 5.6 of the respondents found data mapping to be difficult. The respondents are at a difficulty level of 5.6. In terms of updating vendor contracts, 5. Enabling the right to delete, 4.5. Verifying consumer request, 4.3. Enabling the right of access, 3.4. 3.9, and training is 3.8. Something tells me that a big part of why we are kind of like at a median in terms of the level of difficulty is that they have put policies in place and systems in place to ensure that they are able to move forward towards compliance and building their privacy program on a firm foundation. Thank you for your time and your ears, and that is the end of my presentation.
Oh my gosh, Georgia, thank you so much for that presentation. I have to tell you, I learned a lot. I learned a whole lot about it. And you spoke keenly on the fact that leadership has to be engaged. They have to be just as involved. You have to have a strategy. There has to be this proper alignment associated with that. Mentioned that legislature was already there associated with a lot of this, but you highlighted that there's more accountability required now because of some of the scenarios that have happened before. Enron, we saw Facebook recently as well happening with that network issue. And so accountability, as you highlighted, is such a critical aspect. And even just now when you highlighted, okay, sometimes we see lawyers as annoying or people annoying collecting this data, but not recognizing the bigger picture that there's actually a protection aspect for you as an employee, as an individual in the economic framework, whether it's locally or internationally. And then the main part, which was you have to do this because of commerce, trade. The fact that people, if you want to transact properly, you have to have the structure, and you have to prove that you have the structure, not just say so, but prove it. So we really want to just thank you for that. We have questions coming in already, but I just want to do some housekeeping matters. The questions are going to come at the end, so feel free to ask them, feel free to share them. We'll have the questions at the end. And I think now we're going to have the lovely associate speak to some scenarios and the questions that persons may commonly have in this scenario.
Okay, so you heard Mrs. Henley talk about training and awareness. And when we're working with our clients, we ensure that the staff and management goes through some sort of training. So we're going to give you a little piece of what we do with our clients today. We call it the PLMC Quick Quiz. So I hope you're seeing my screen. and we're going to try to go quickly through it. Right, so I'm going to be talking to you about Paula Brown. I saw, however, a comment in the chat from Journal Smalling, and I found it, that I was thinking of this as well. Journal said employers will now have to up their privacy standards. Hello, human resource personnel, HR will get. But this is about an HR manager, so I hope even Journal will get the answers to these questions. So let me tell you what Paula Brown did. Paula Brown, she's the human resource manager at Bamboo Enterprises. She's responding to an outside research, and she's asked to include data to support her points. Now, Paula has access to Bamboo Enterprises human resource files. The employees do not know that their personal data is being used for the purposes of Paula's personal research. So she goes and she takes the people personal data and use it in her personal research. So what I want you to tell me is Paula justified in her use of the employee's data for her personal research purposes? You can just drop your answers in the chat. We will see them quickly.
Our next question is, what, if any, are the organizational solutions to this problem? Is it A, implement data protection policies, B, conduct staff training sessions on data protection, C, implement a privacy program, and D, block Paula's access to the data?
It doesn't have to be one answer. If you think it's more than one, then you can just drop A, B, and C, or you can say C and D. I mean, it's up to you.
Or all of the above.
I'm seeing a varying number of answers. There were at first more no's. Then someone else saying, some persons say consent is required. Some say a resounding no. Her personal project assignment, some say ABC. No, the staff data is for the company use, HR specific use only. A and C, all of the above. Shav, what's the answer?
No, the truth is, many times it depends. And so when we're going through training sessions with the attendees, we seek to impart knowledge of the relevant data privacy principles. There are principles such as data minimization and purpose limitation. Now, data minimization, you are not supposed to collect more personal data than you need. Purpose limitation, you are not allowed to use the data other than for the purposes for which it was collected. So no, Paula Brown is not justified in her use of the employee's personal data. And to the person who said all of the above, I mean, Paula Brown is the HR manager, so to block her access to the HR files, it might impede her role. So definitely the company is going to need to implement data protection policies. They're going to need to ensure that Paula Brown is trained, other staff members are trained, so that things like these do not happen again. We don't only impart knowledge on our trainees, we try to ensure that they understand the principles that we are sharing with them. Back to you, Lecia.
I enjoyed that quiz, and I like that quiz in particular, and I like the fact that you ask questions. Proper questions give us an understanding of how people think and how organizations operate. And so if we notice the answers were different because organizational scenarios are different, and also people are at different levels of maturity of understanding data privacy and privacy governance. And so that's what we're learning here today. So it's a really great session, rich and exciting. You see, the team is very cool. They're not boring at all. We're engaging your mind. We're allowing you to think outside of the box and consider the importance for something like data minimization, you don't have to be collecting what you don't need. Because at the end of the day, that's more data to store and more money to spend on storage that you don't need to. And you could repurpose that money to get in Georgia Gibson Henlin to come and do some training for the HR manager who didn't need to be looking at that data, right? So we're considering these things as we're going through. And so I know that we're just going to be getting into now the how. So Georgia Gibson Henlin, with her astute knowledge, spoke to the strategic side and how you think about it, how you start. But now we need to get into, okay, so great, we had those strategic conversations, and great, we know we need to do it. And yes, that legalese that exists needs to be addressed for us as an entity or for me as an individual. But how are we going to start? Why should we start? Where do we start? So now I'm going to hand over to the lovely ladies again to introduce Kelly Ray Campbell and Cherie Roden, who I met today, and they are just a blast. I've already added them on LinkedIn, and we're going to get, yeah man, Cherie and I, we're going to have a great conversation. I'm looking forward to that. We're going to learn so much from each other. And I definitely want to just allow the ladies to introduce them, because these girls are the real deal.
Thank you, Lacia. Good afternoon again, everyone. My name is Shireen Willis, and I am a governance, risk, and compliance specialist at Privacy and Legal Management Consultants Limited, where we are headed by the exemplary Georgia Gibson Henlin QC. Today, I have the great pleasure of introducing these two phenomenal women in privacy. These women will be our panelists for this session. Our first panelist is none other than Mrs. Kelly Ray Campbell. She will be presenting on the topic Data Mapping 101. Kelly Ray is a woman of many hats. She is an attorney at law, a certified privacy professional, and a certified privacy manager. Kelly Ray is also a proud member of the International Association of Privacy Professionals, where she is a current co-chair of the Provisional Knowledge Net chapter of the Caribbean. Kelly Ray is also currently the Group Data Privacy Counsel at Digicel Jamaica. Not only is Kelly Ray a privacy professional, but she's an entrepreneur and founder of Nexo Professional Spaces Limited. Our second panelist for our session today is Ms. Cherie Roden. Ms. Cherie Roden will be presenting on vendor assessments and risk management. Cherie is also a certified privacy professional and a mediator. She's also the head of privacy at Simply Secured Group and a chief privacy specialist at Global Privacy Solutions, which are companies in the privacy space. Last but not least, Cherie is a board member at the International Association of Privacy Professionals, KnowledgeNet Caribbean chapter. Let us all welcome these two phenomenal ladies in privacy as they speak to us. Over to you, Kelly Ray.
Thank you so much, Shireen, for that introduction. Let me go right into the presentation. Good afternoon, everyone. Now, Georgia gave a really good foundation for what you need: privacy governance, developing a privacy program. But what do? You now know you need to have privacy in your organization and you have no idea where to start. Well, a great starting point for just about any organization or any new project that a privacy team might be undertaking to understand where data is, how it flows, and what to do, how to prioritize your resources, your efforts, what to do with certain risk assessments. If you want to create policy in response to incidents, what exactly needs to be done is simply data mapping. And so I'll take you through on a practical level. I hope to be quick. What is there to do? What is data mapping? How do you go about mapping the data of your org? Now, what is data mapping? Quite simply, data mapping is the process of collecting information on how data flows within your organization and then putting that in a visual representation. Now, data mapping, a data map can look just about, it varies in how it looks. So it can look like an Excel sheet or an Excel file, or it can actually look like a visual map. I'll go into that a little bit later and just share some examples, but it gives a visual representation of where data is stored, how it flows through the life cycle of within an organization, and just what data is collected, how is it used. Now, this data visualization can often help employees to quickly navigate, where's the data, what are we doing with it, how are we processing it? And it's considered best practice for compliance with regards to data protection regulations, from GDPR to locally the Data Protection Act. Now, this process of data mapping can assist with bridging the gap between, system level architecture and processes. It can capture crucial information to help just understand the landscape of what is happening in your organization when it comes to personal data flows. It can help also with ensuring compliance with how is data to be used. Are we using it correctly? Are we compliant with the relevant regulation? How is it being handled? Who is handling it? How is it being shared? It can help as well with launching and guiding the overall privacy management program. So usually when you want to launch a privacy program, this is the first thing you do. You figure out what is it that you have and how it's being utilized as is. It can also assist in tech spaces, tech organization, in conducting cybersecurity risk analysis. You want to identify certain security gaps, identify rogue data repositories. It's very common where organizations discover that there is a certain repository that, not a lot of persons due to succession knew about this particular repository or data information. And so data mapping can help to identify that, where sometimes information goes and it just disappears. It can also help with planning your, as I said before, breach incident response plan, and also help you as organizations or businesses to provide transparency to regulators, business partners on processing activities. So when you're entering into a DPA for a data processing agreement, for example, it gives you can easily understand what happens if you have a data map that already expresses, when you collect information at this particular point, where it goes and what is the data life cycle on that. It can also help you to assess the impact on organizational change on data handling practices. Now, as I said before, the quality, the content, and the presentation of data maps can vary, and so too can the collection methods. Now, often a good place to start is what is the objective? What is the purpose of this data map? Will you be utilizing this data map, for compliance reasons? Is it that you want just a visual understanding of where most of your data is? And so it may look different depending on, what the reason for it is. Now, I like to use the industry standard because it gives you just a good idea of what you're supposed to be doing. And GDPR, which I consider the industry standard, actually articulates the legal requirements for what they call the a record of processing activities. And that in and of itself, once you're complete with the data mapping process, gives you a good record of what your processing activities look like. So regardless of the means or the method, an ideal data map should provide you with a clear, transparent, and auditable account of the personal data or the personally identifiable information that your company or organization collects. Now, as I said, this can be as simple as an Excel file, and I'll show you an example a little later, or it can actually be, a physical map with a visual representation. Now, when visualized, data maps tend to often contain these little nodes and links, and you can click out and stuff like that. You have a lot of organizations now in the field that actually help businesses, whether small, medium, or large enterprises, to construct the data maps. It can be a manual process, or it can also be automated. But as I said, we'll go into a little bit more into that in a little bit. Now, when starting to data map, the first thing to understand is what is the life cycle of data? What happens to data? Because what is going to happen is that you're going to have to utilize the data life cycle to collect the data map, or to map out, what the data looks like. Now, a data life cycle provides just a general high-level overview of how data flows through an organization, including its business process and IT systems. And this is basically it. You start with creation, you store the data, you use the data, you may share the data, and then you might retain it or archive it for future use, and then data is destroyed. That's on a very basic level, what happens in a data cycle. And so what you do during this process and looking at the data cycle is ask questions at each level, asking questions at the data collection, at the creation side, where are you collecting this data from? You're asking questions at the data storage side. Where do we keep this data? Who is storing this data? Then you're asking questions at the use and share, archive, etc. I know the next slide kind of shows a little bit better how you use the data lifecycle to provide an organized approach to collecting the data that you need to develop data maps. Now, the benefits of doing this is that it typically, the data lifecycle aligns with, or it can be cross-referenced to business process mapping. So you should be, while going through your data lifecycle, seeing your business goals and operations coming out, or it should be aligned. If it's not, then there's a gap there that needs to be fixed. It also gives you a detailed record of the key processes and activities within the organization. It can aid in the identification of knowledge gaps to promote further investigation. It can increase the knowledge of data handling practices within your organization. And then it can form the basis for the best practices and regulator standards that you need. Now, when you're gathering this information and you're following the data life cycle, the collection of information, as I said before, can take several different means or methods. You have typically procedural questionnaires that are given to those stakeholders, whether they be internal stakeholders that are handling data that might come into contact with the data. It might be the responsible officers or business owners internally. You might have face-to-face conversations and interviews just to understand, sometimes there are principles or policies that are not written, but that are handed down through practice. And so face-to-face conversation and interviews on data handling come in handy. There's also the reviewing of policies and informal documentation that might be, going around your organization. And then you might, in a situation where it's a new project that you're doing a data mapping for, you're taking on this new project and you want to figure out, where is the data going to flow, or where is the data flowing, then you might ask the project team specific questions, just depending on the purpose of the data. Now, before I head there, some of the questions you tend to ask along this data life cycle is, who is the owner? Are we the organization or the business, the controller, or are we the processor? Where is the data being collected? Is it that the data is being collected through a website, a customer online form? Is it that, you know, we're collecting it from employees manually? How is the data coming into the organization? Businesses at this point need to understand under the data collection section what the source is and how we're collecting it. Then you have data subjects. Who are we collecting this information from? Is it our website visitors? Is it our consumers? Is it our employees? All of this needs to be collected and also put down or recorded in the data map. What data is being collected? Georgia would have described earlier personal data and sensitive information. Is it that we're collecting name, ID numbers, genetic health data, cultural data? What is it that we're collecting? Is the information identifiable or is it de-identified? Is it, you know, sensitive information? Does it contain information on your sexual orientation, race, you know, trade union membership, religious information, health information, biometric data, genetic? So that's also important. Where is the data being stored and what is the format of the data? Is it encrypted? Now, if an organization is going to have an appropriate understanding of its data privacy practices in place at the time of the data mapping, then it needs to understand where the data is being stored and all locations and what format is it being held in. Are there technical or organizational measures in place to protect the data in whatever format it is? Now, most organizations nowadays store information electronically, but in Jamaica especially, there are quite a few that continue to have old paper records. They haven't necessarily gone through the digitization process. And so especially on employee files that might have personally identifiable information, might still, you know, be a manual process or still in paper. But even with, you know, electronic records, there needs to be in-depth information gathered on, you know, how it is stored. Is it stored on local servers? Is it on the cloud? Or is it being stored through a processor, equipment owned by a third-party vendor? All of that needs to be encapsulated. Those questions are what you need to be asking to get a good understanding. Another question is, where does the data go? Now, especially at a multinational organization, it can be very hard once data enters to track data because you might have it bouncing from, you know, different servers all over the world. But it is important to understand where data goes internally, from department to department, intra-company, and then also externally to third-party vendors. It's important that we pay attention to whether it's crossing borders, because as Georgia also mentioned, you might be subject to GDPR regulations and other territories, because GDPR is not the only, you know, EU is not the only territory that has put in place, you know, extraterritorial scope. And so we need to be careful, and we need to have a good understanding of, you know, those data protection regulations all over the world that might have extraterritorial application. Are we processing the data belonging, where are we targeting and processing data belonging to EU citizens, belonging to Bayesian citizens, Bermudans, people from Cayman? there's just a good understanding that needs to happen, when collecting data, especially when you're transferring data internationally. Now, what is the data being used for? And then this tends to be, I think, the most difficult part of the process. And that's understanding how are we using the data? How is the data being processed? You need to understand as an organization or a business, your processing activities. In order for you to provide the most accurate disclosures to consumers, but also for you to communicate truthfully with regulators and to fulfill your obligations under data protection regulations. So our organizations need to, take a step back, look at, how am I processing? The wonderful ladies, I think it was Chevanese, also spoke to data minimization and limitation. Is it that you're utilizing those standards for data privacy and protection? Are you, in the way you're utilizing data, adhering to the standards? Are you demonstrating privacy by design? So when asking this question and going through the, understanding the data processing, that's also important. And this data map in and of itself can help you to gather and kind of know a better idea of where you're at, compliance-wise and just practice-wise. Another question, it goes out to the data destruction and retention. How long is the data being retained for? Is there a data retention policy in place? When is it deleted? How is it deleted? Data retention or archiving is quite another important area of principles of or the standards of data protection. Whether you want to employ a privacy by design approach, which is what is recommended, and utilizing data minimization. Now, although most data flow mapping is focused on collection and sharing, a comprehensive data map will look from creation, the entire life cycle, from creation to processing to deletion. And that's just a quick overview of the process. But throughout every step of the data life cycle, it's quite important to ensure that you're asking the questions and recording the answers. Now, I covered most of this, but what is in a data map? The data owner, purpose of processing, name and contact of joint controllers, if applicable, categories of personal data being stored, the types of personal data, categories of recipients, links to contracts with processors. This is something that is sometimes overlooked when you have data processors. If you're a controller, who is it that has access to the data or might be processing on your behalf? And just a quick, the ability to pull up so you understand the scope of their obligations, what the processors are doing, the data format, how is it being stored, is it being encrypted, the source of the information, the method of data transfer. Also, for method of data transfer, it's also important to note those technical and organizational measures that are being used for data transfer. Is the data itself exposed while being transferred, or is it encrypted? Where is the data located? What is the retention schedule and the destruction policy? Now, once you've completed all of this and you've recorded it, whether in an Excel file or a more complex visual representation, what do? This is where you find the gaps. Do you have the appropriate mechanism for cross-border data transfers? Do you have consent for the way in which you're utilizing the data? Is it compliant, or does it adhere to the data processing agreements that you have in place. What about your privacy notice? Have you sufficiently notified the data subjects on how you've been utilizing this data? Do you even have a legal basis for the processing of this information? With employee information, is it that you're giving the adequate notice to your employees for how their data will be used? This is a generally overlooked area, but it can be, based on what I understand, a major area of non-compliance. And with the technical and organizational measures, what I've seen a couple of times, is it that the security budget you currently have in place, is it that that security budget accurately reflects the high-risk processes that might be taking place within your organization? Because there might be sensitive information or sensitive data somewhere with hardly any security measures, but then a low-risk activity that, it doesn't really add up because the budget isn't there for the security of that processing. Now, it's also important that at that time you look at these high-risk processes and determine whether you need to do like a privacy impact assessment. And then from data maps, you can also create reports. There's the records of processing activities that I alluded to earlier. There are asset maps, which gives you a visual idea of, where your assets might be located globally, or an idea of a cross-border transfers, or it can just be a regular data flow diagram. The challenge now lies in the ongoing maintenance of the data map. You've completed the data map, kudos to you, that's awesome. But the next step is ensuring that it stays up to date and in compliance with any data protection or privacy regulation that may be applicable to your organization. Now, I know that again, this was alluded to earlier, but it can, in some instances, be imperative that you do have a data protection officer to assist with maintaining that data map going forward, as well as owners of the types of data, ensuring that the owners of the different types of data are cognizant of their responsibilities in order to ensure that there is accountability and there's compliance at all levels. Now I'm going to just show you briefly some data map examples and templates. This is a form, an audit data mapping form. I don't want to disclose the different suppliers, but if you want, I believe Georgia works with OneTrust and they have a really excellent data mapping program. So for the purpose of this presentation, I will plug OneTrust. And so this is just, in the data collection.
You're plugging PLMC, please. We are
yes, PLMC. Yes. I'm plugging PLMC with their partnership. Thanks, Georgia. Yes. So yeah, so this is just just a very basic questionnaire. Let's get started. What data do you collect? Where does it go? Things of that nature. And this is just an example of what it looks Excel-wise. So it's basic. This is I believe an internal employee data map that was done for a GDPR impact assessment. And it looked at the type of data process, the description of the data internally. And this is another method of just, collecting data and representing it in this method. And then this is another organization that conducts data mapping for companies. And they do it they present their data map in it's an interactive clickable way. So you can actually click on these little icons and find out more information. And it also extends. So if you'd like to see, the data retention, the other parts of the data lifecycle, you can also click through and do it. But this is a bigger organization that has a lot more data, and just it would be overwhelming, I'm guessing, to put it in an Excel form. And so this is just a high level look at, you know, their data flow. This again is another high level look at data flow. And for this data map, they were assessing, you know, marketing emails, sending marketing emails. So you start with, you know, the individuals, and this is also a clickable one. The website, that was the source, the processing, the use, and the destruction. And that's basically it on data mapping. Should you have any questions, feel free to email me. And my website is also there. Thank you for having me.
Fabulous, Kelly Ray, fabulous. We enjoyed that. We're just gonna shift you right into Sherry, given the time, very respectful of time. So Sherry, over to you.
Yes, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much first to Georgia for having me and to be on the panel sharing with these beautiful ladies tonight. I'm going to be sharing with you tonight vendor assessment and risk management. Let me just pull up here. Sure. One moment. Okay, so as everyone, I hope everyone is doing all right. I know we've been together for a little bit now, but in this presentation, when we talk about vendor assessment and risk management, my goal is to give you some practical steps and practical considerations that you as a company, or if you're DPOs online now or other privacy professionals, what you should be considering when considering your risk management with third parties. That's just a little bit about me. And I want to start here because we throw around this acronym a lot in the industry, GRC. GRC means governance, risk, and compliance. A data controller, well, GRC is simply a set of processes and procedures to help organizations achieve business objectives. It's also used to address uncertainties and allow the company to act with integrity.
Sorry?
Can you hear me?
Start your slideshow because we're seeing your notes.
Right.
You can, here. I'll just use my notes on here. Okay. Is that better, Jojo?
No, we're actually still
You haven't started the show though, so start the show.
What is it?
From beginning.
Okay, let me stop sharing and I'll do it again because I'm not sure. I'm seeing it on my end.
That's fine. No problem. We'll just bubble right through.
Are you seeing it now?
No, we're seeing your notes, but it's fine. We'll share.
You're seeing my notes?
We are.
Right.
1 second. I'm just going to.
In the meantime, while you do that, I'm gonna speak a little to Kelly Ree's presentation on the data mapping side. While you just that, and more than likely you just have a second screen and it's switching over. So
Yes.
that's fine. So Kelly, I just want to talk a little bit about your presentation, the data mapping side. So what I find in my profession is that that's one of the harder sides for people to start, because let's face it, people really don't like taking notes, right? Most of the any of the participants, can you tell me if you like taking notes? Please tell me if you like taking notes. Most people don't like to document, right? And so that's one of the harder parts. So I want to ask one question associated with the data protection officer. Because what I find in the field is that you'll have a records management department, you have a records officer, because that's what it was called in the past. It was called a record rather than a data item, data set, metadata, etc. And then you have some organizations who may have an information officer. So that person manages how information flows, not necessarily data in and of itself, meaning like a 1 and a 0 or a letter, but they manage the information. Is it a situation where that entity can look and say, okay, maybe I can train that person in records management or train that person in information management to become that data protection officer? Is that possible?
I won't say anything is impossible, but is it advised? I would. So Georgia would have stated a little bit earlier that, you know, data protection particularly, it usually sits squarely within legal. However, it requires working with different
Are you
departments.
seeing it, Georgia?
It typically requires you working closely with different departments. So working with, you know, a chief information officer, for example, would be within the role of the data protection officer. Working closely with, you know, records management department would also be within the role of a data protection officer. And what the data protection officer really is there to do is to guide the company to ensure that, you know, they are remaining compliant with whatever laws that are applicable or regulations that apply to them or, you know, to the organization, while also advising internally on best practices, how to utilize certain processes and procedures in a way that encourages or ensures that, you know, the company has a privacy by design process or a privacy by design approach. And it's also a part of the role, I would say, is to ensure that the privacy program within the company is one that is comprehensive and that is understood by by the organization and the employees, especially those persons that will have direct interaction or access to the data. And so that's where training comes in, where, you know, training and awareness in the organization, ensuring that the privacy policy or and when I say privacy policy, I'm referring to the company's privacy vision, privacy mission, and the policy behind that is not just a document, but that it is, you know, in practice, and that it is being utilized in a way that ensures that the company remains compliant.
Right. Agreed. That makes sense. Thanks for that. I appreciate it. And I wanted to touch another point as well as we continue to work. You mentioned the part about budget. And that's so important because what I find, especially when we're working on technology and you know, I'll just share when we met together, I think we had a commonality where I shared with you one of the first things that I do in my role when I speak to my customers is, especially when they're dealing with security assessments or they're looking to acquire security technology, I'll say, how do you manage your data? And one of the first things that I ask is, do you have a records management department? Do you have somebody who manages data? What does that look like for you? And sometimes it's a little difficult for them to answer. And so I want to talk about the budget side, because let's face the reality, right? At this point in the pandemic, especially because of it, there is fiscal constraints, but it's not all the time where it's only fiscal. Sometimes it's focus constraints. You know, people aren't necessarily focused on that just yet. They're focused on something else. They have to finish that project. When they look at their PMO, it's kind of rough to be adding an additional complex project, and a project like this requires intense focus from the organization. Yes. So essentially, what are some of the ideas that you have for them maneuvering the budget side, right? Okay.
What I do when I try to maneuver a budget conversation, particularly in data protection, the data protection space, is that I start with the end in mind, and I start with the worst possible result, which is fines. This is what it's going to cost you if you're not compliant. I love the fact, I love the fact that the EU has taken such a strong stance, and there are so many more examples to kind of pull from and present. Look at the reputational harm that has come from, certain companies being fined under regulations, under GDPR in the EU. Look at the approach, and I think Cayman is on their way there with kind of the same approach, which is, this is where we're taking a hard stance. Companies need to be compliant. And so if it is that you start with the end in mind, which is this is what's going to happen, or this is what you're at risk of happening, then it is a little bit easier to navigate the conversation. It's we need to budget in a way that is sustainable, not only for the business, but also to ensure that we're remaining compliant and out of the minds of the consumers in a bad way, and out of the minds of the regulators also in a bad way. We don't want to. You have to approach privacy as a serious issue on the balance sheet, and so my conversations are always starting with, this is the worst case scenario. So you let me know if the budget allows for something like this to happen as a contingency.
Got it. I appreciate that, Kelly Ray. So we're gonna just get into it with Cherie. So Cherie, we just go through, because we in life as women and as professionals in data and IT, we just have to make it work and push and go through. So that's what we're gonna do today. And so what I'm pretty sure everybody can see, and I know some people are already raising their hands. So go ahead, Cherie.
Yes, and I hope you guys can see my screen. I'm not sure what the view looks like on your end, but the important thing for us tonight is for you guys to, get the information and bring it back to your company and have something useful that you can learn tonight. So if the even if I'm not seeing, I don't know why I'm getting messages that you guys are seeing my notes and I'm not seeing them. So maybe it's more information for you guys to have. So going back to what is GRC, is a set of processes and procedures to help organizations achieve business objectives. We want to implement governance from the onset, and as Georgia mentioned in the beginning, that it's very heavily policy driven, in that most of what we do in privacy is governed in some way by a policy. And I just want to reiterate that data right here before we move on, that data controllers are responsible for what the vendor do with the information that they give them. So it's not okay for you to say, oh, I give it to a third party vendor. I am no longer responsible for how that third-party vendor uses and processes the data. And if there is a breach down the line or any mismanagement of that personal data, the controller is still on the line. And just as a quick agenda, like I said, I wanted to give you guys some practical steps and considerations for vendor risk management. And we're going to go through these 5 things. We're going to go through planning, due diligence and third-party selection, contract negotiations, ongoing monitoring, and termination of a contract. So planning, what is planning? Planning is the essential first step because you want to know what you need from that particular vendor. You have to outline the goals and the strategic purposes for bringing on a particular third party. What are the compliance concerns and inherent risk that's posed when we involve third party? And this is important because there are scopes evolve over time, and we have to periodically identify how scopes change, how the use of a third party change, maybe different technology is being utilized, and we need to really zoom in on the scope. Complexity and security, you know, depending on the complexity of the service being offered, will gear you as to how hard or how high you will rate that vendor on the on their risk factor to your company. You know, we want to consider relationships and how the relationship of doing business with this particular vendor, how would it affect other initiatives within the company? Is it going to affect my marketing? Is it going to affect my HR? And it's important to understand how that relationship works together. Termination, even in going into and planning for the relation, the life cycle, we want to also consider termination. What's the contingency plan if something should go wrong? And the laws, what laws are we subject to? What specific laws do we assess to this particular set of laws? And you would know from Kelly Ray and how she determined what laws apply to how we determine, how we set out the data map. Because, for example, if we have data being housed in a UK server, the laws in the UK, as we've been stressing tonight, will govern that use. And finally, the assessment. And the assessments detail how a company select, assess, and oversee a third party. And we'll get more into that with the due diligence and a little bit more about how we include monitoring for them. And that brings me to our due diligence. The next step is due diligence. And in the industry, there's a lot of questions and uncertainty around a due diligence questionnaire. And I just want to pause here for a second to really talk about this pain point, because there isn't a set of questionnaires that you can just apply and check off, and that will apply to every third party relationship that you may come across. But you have what's the norm going into doing your due diligence with some of these vendors. The norm is to ask the vendor what, you know, almost like a pro tip. I want to say almost like a pro tip in today's market. The vendor is expected to prepare that due diligence questionnaire. If they are a reputable company, if they have, you know, if they've considered business continuity, incident response plans, you know, what does their controls look like? Have they done a SOC 2? What sort of upfront or external audits that has been conducted for that company? You really want to get some of that practical information from the vendor initially before going into business permanently with a vendor. Do the due diligence. Consider those financial consideration. Is it something that's within the scope of the business right now? Can we, you know, float the risk maybe till next year? What is best for the company? These are some of the due diligence questions that you'd have to ask. And I just want to quickly go through, because I know we're up on time. And just quickly flowing into the contract negotiation portion. Contract negotiation is super, super important, because here we will we'll set out the rights and responsibilities of each parties involved. We'll discuss the nature and the scope of the arrangement. How are we going to, do we have the right to audit, to require them to give us information? It'll also give us an opportunity to really flesh out how, for example, if there is a breach, how are they handling that? All of that will be set out in contract negotiations. And contract negotiations is really important. I just want to stop here and say it's important to get the buy-in of the senior management or board approval, because once that contract is signed, you're indebted or you're bound to that contract once it's signed off. So you really want to take this opportunity to really get legal compliance. You want to get everyone's input who's being affected. So all of the responsible parties, get them together and get their opinion on what should be included in some of these contract negotiations. Get IT to really lead on how their controls are to be organized and what the standard is that the company is going into. Ongoing monitoring is really important here, because you have to periodically review existing contracts, periodically review processes and procedures to ensure that what you said that you were doing maybe a year ago, the process is still the same, it's still useful, and it's still protecting you as a company. So the ongoing monitoring of our third-party vendors is very important, because we want, if any of those processes that the third-party vendor uses may change or they introduce new technology, we want to know, and we want to be abreast of that information very quickly. And I just want to say, a comprehensive monitoring strategy is especially necessary for vendor relationships involved in critical activities. So if you're doing like cloud storage of personally identifiable information of children, of your health information, of banking information, some of those very personally identifiable information, any of those really highly sensitive information, we want to pay really close attention to and give them that ongoing monitoring that's required to be compliant. And I put here real quick the example of the wooden spoon from my mentor, and I just want to quickly give the analogy of continuity and ongoing monitoring. We want to be, as data privacy professionals, the spoon that stirs the soup. So the spoon is in there combining the ingredients and bringing all of the ingredients, spices and vegetables, meats, bringing the stew together. But once that spoon is removed, the stew or the soup still remains intact. But what we once we remove ourselves from the equation, the processes that we have laid out, it's still ongoing. We can still look to those policies to guide us in the future. And finally, termination. Termination is to plan the termination in the beginning. It varies, because termination can happen or the reasons for terminations vary from expiration or satisfaction of the contract. You desire to seek alternative vendors, or even breach of the contract may bring termination of the contract. And we want to consider what that would look like in the event that would happen. And we want to mitigate those losses in planning for the termination within that initial planning stage, as I mentioned before. For termination, we really want to consider, the capabilities, the resources, and timeframes for the transition of the activity. So like offboarding and what does that look like? Changing hands. What does that data retention and destruction look like? Do we have to do ongoing monitoring even after the end of the agreement? What does that look like? Is there any reputational risk for termination of a contract because of a vendor's inability to meet expectations? These are some of the considerations you have to bake into that plan for termination. And just quickly, some key points. So in relation to data subjects, you may have to obtain consent to allow a third party to process the data. Upon request, you must be able to grant access to a vendor information along with the data that they process. And you must be able to correct any inaccuracies on a vendor system within a specific time frame. So what does this mean? This means that you must have an intimate and very good business relationship with your vendor, because ultimately you might need access to their system and to their processes. And that may include maybe intellectual property of how they carry out their business on their end. So the relationship has to be one of trust, has to be one that's contractual, and one that has input from all various departments within the company to make that decision to bring on that third party. A few other key points that I want to mention real quick, it's that I just kind of mentioned it. It's not just a legal decision. I know from a legal background, we would say, oh, where does it sit? Maybe in the legal department, but it's an IT, security, finances, legal, compliance, marketing, HR, stakeholders, down to the very employee that's holding and handling the data set. It's a collaborative effort to really pull together processes that can be ongoing. And that's it. That's all from me. I know that was kind of a condensed version, but please reach out to me on LinkedIn and check out my new business, Global Privacy Solutions, LLC. And feel free to contact me. We can always have those discussions further. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Sheree. And we saw that you went through and you wrote it. I appreciate that, because vendor assessment is very critical. And I'm glad you mentioned the importance of trust relationships. And I really want to highlight something very important before we get into the questions. Georgia Gibson Helen and her team. The marriage between legal and IT, I had mentioned it to her yesterday. It's very rare. Most of us on this session, because I know some of the participants in the chat, hello, good day to all my friends and family there, right? It's a very rare find, you see, because most times, let's be honest, legal and IT are at war. They don't really like each other, okay? Yeah. And they're at war. And so to have someone who can help you build that trust in the presentations, if you notice, there was an importance that Georgia, which was ensuring that there's alignment across business units, especially if you have regional geographies. So to have someone who already marries two business units that are always at war, that's a plus. I'm just highlighting that. That's really important, because it is very rare to find, not only locally, but worldwide. Just telling you that one from experience. Okay, so I also want to highlight as well just some quick housekeeping matters before we get into the Q&A. You can follow the Privacy Legal Management and Consultants Limited team on social media, but you can also email them at Henlin, that's HENLIN at privacymgmt.org. Okay, so we'll put that in the chat for you as well. Make sure you email, ask questions, because I know you have a lot. I saw some hands raising, and I want to take one of the main questions that came with your first presentation, Georgia, right? Uh-huh. I saw that message. Okay, so one of the first questions that was asked at 4:47 p.m. actually was, how does the act impact a sole proprietor or a sole practitioner who does everything by themselves? This is very common for most SMBs. Yes. How would he or she protect themselves? Can persons outsource that aspect of their business for the data to be kept by a company like yours? Can you guys handle that? That's the question there.
I think that's precisely what we do, but I will have Shav respond.
Lacey was a bit low for me. Lacey, could you repeat the question, please?
All right, not a problem. So the question was, in summary, if I'm a sole proprietor and I need to protect my data, I handle everything myself. That's how it works legally, yes? And I am held accountable for everything. How do I protect myself as a male or female? How do I do that? Can I outsource that to you as PLMC to handle that for me? Essentially, that's the question that's being asked. And it's a very good question.
It is a very good question indeed. And I think the best answer would be to contact us at henlin@privacymgmt.org. It is very important for not just big organizations, but for sole proprietors to ensure that they are in a position to be compliant with the obligations under the Data Protection Act. We know that not every business will require a very large privacy program, but the need for a data protection officer will be there. We can assist you with setting that up, assisting you with, letting you know the qualifications that a data protection officer is supposed to have, assist with training. We are here to help, and we are happy that you joined this conference.
Wonderful, wonderful. I like that because, boy, if I was running a business, I'm telling you, I wouldn't know where to start and I would really need the help. So listen, note that down. They're going to help you with the recruitment and the management side and all of that. And they're also going to assist you with understanding how to just map that across. Kelly Ray, have your hand up, so go ahead.
Yeah, I would just like to add that, based on the question, you don't necessarily have to have a full data protection officer in-house and an entire privacy team. PLMC, I believe, too, offers what you call DPO as a service.
Yes.
So you are able to, as they're able to come in and assess the needs of your company, assess the needs of your business, and then help to equip you from there on what's the best solution for you to reach a place of compliance. That service is there.
I was modest.
I like that.
I was another plug. Georgia.
They can manage the budget too. So Georgia,
it's not one size does not fit all. So I'm sure if you find the right people, consultants.
Awesome. Georgia, I believe you had something to share just now.
I did.
Okay, never mind. That's fine. No problem. No, but that's really good, guys. And I just want to share as well that if you're offering it as a service, that helps the budget scenario, right? We're solving that problem because, boy, you don't have to sink the cost. You don't have to write it off. You can pay for it as you need. So you can manage the structure of moving at least at a pace. In your presentation, you spoke to showing intent and highlighting proactivity. So if you're proactively planning for using DPO as a service with Georgia and the team, then it sounds like it's a great thing, right? And at least from an accountability perspective, you're starting, you're moving ahead, and you're going through, right? I do want to respect everybody's time. We've had so many participants, almost 70 people online after 4 o'clock when you have to pick up your people. This is serious. This is awesome. It's very important to people, obviously, as we can see. And we're just happy to have everybody on still. Just a few more questions quickly. Please, in the chat, ladies, if you could put your LinkedIn contact. Persons are asking for your contact information, your email as well, Cherie and Kelly, please do that. I saw some persons highlighting that. So if you could be specific there, putting it in the chat for them, they can note it down. Some people save the chat and all these things. But if you could definitely do that, that would be very helpful for them. For the data protection side and the data mapping, right? I noticed as well when you spoke to GDPR, Kelly, you had mentioned that it was a standard that is used. And also the fact that, you know, Cherie, you highlighted that there has to be this level of trust, because if you're going to be outsourcing to Georgia Gibson Henning or anyone else, or working with a vendor, as you said, Cherie, they have to be open to sharing data and how it's stored. Even for us recently with our customers, some of them actually ask us that information too. So I just wanted you to touch on that again. Why is it critical and important to maintain the relationship, not just have somebody you buy stuff from, but also ensuring that you know them, you know who they are, what they do. Just speak a little more on that for us, Cherie.
I think as we move towards zero trust, I know everybody's been throwing around this this phrase zero trust, to mean that we have your information so secure that you can ensure that however we say that we are processing your data, it's how we're doing it, and we have the documentation and have been evidenced in our policies and evidenced in our reports to the authorities and things like that, that we are in fact handling data in the manner in which we said that we are. So if it's that we're saying we're not sharing your data, when we collect your information, we say, okay, we won't share your data. It's just for maybe the purposes of conducting this transaction. The data doesn't move from there. You can't then go and sell that data for a profit, because in the information age, data is now the new gold. So that is why we have to put in place these regulations and these laws to kind of govern how we treat someone's personal human right at the end of the day. And companies want to ensure that their clients and their customers know that, you know, doing business with me, your bank account is safe, your personal information is safe, your health information is safe. I'm not going to be sharing that with with anyone, so that's why it's important on many different levels also.
Awesome. And we want to wrap up here before I close with lovely words. So I want to just pose just one question to each of you, right? To Georgia, to Kelly, and to you. What's the one thing that you definitely want persons to take away? And just a reminder, remember that there's another session on Friday, right? Another session on Friday. It's going to be hosted or mediated by Hines, right? Okay. So Jamaica Computer Society, they have a lovely, lovely long new name now. So remember to join on Friday, and then there's going to be a networking session where you can actually ask your questions directly to the persons who are there. So let me just go back to the questions, right? What's that one thing that you'd love for persons to take away as they, consider this for when they're going to office tomorrow? They have to go get some work done now. That's why they're on the call. So what is going to happen? What is it that you want them to think about critically? The one thing that they want them to take away. I'll start with you, Georgia.
LMC.
Okay. Well,
but seriously.
Simple.
All right.
But seriously, though, I think it will be privacy matters.
Yes, privacy matters. Absolutely. Good point. Good point. Kelly Ray, what about you?
I would say that in starting any privacy project, privacy matter, privacy, in trying to create a privacy program, the best place to start is the beginning. And the beginning is understanding your data, how it flows, where it goes. You need data mapping.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that. And that is truer than true. Cherie?
Yes, and I think we all are in the trenches of implementing a data privacy program on a large scale. Kelly at Digital and myself at a large multinational company. And what I want to say is that this is a cowboy tone right now. We are, don't be afraid to make mistakes in your implementation, because some of the directives may be vague. Don't let it impede you of taking action. Do it, and then you may have to correct and iterate later down the line, but don't let that stop you in seeking out the information, contacting PLMC, reaching out to them, just even a phone call to say, is this a matter that I should be concerned with? It's a new area, so there's a lot of uncertainties, but it's like eating an elephant. You eat it one bite at a time. So you find that what works for you here in this area, you implement it. You find what works there in this area, you implement it one bite at a time.
Wow. Those are strong words. There was a leader that told me once, you can't boil the ocean. I like that. Yeah.
I like that.
One step at a time, and she was absolutely right. Woman too, just like us, bold and so forth. So I just want to highlight as well, and thank you so much, ladies, for this opportunity to be with you here, and also just to share. This is a critical time. Cybersecurity threats have increased by at least 40 to 50% since the pandemic has begun from December 2019. This is not a joke. We all know that it's serious times. I just want to highlight as well that you can find PLMC at Suites 3 and 4 on 24 Cargill Avenue, and you can call them at 908-355-5. Or remember the email, HENLIN@privacy, PRIVACYMGMT.org, and follow them on social media at PLMC Jamaica. Really simple, super easy to find. Make sure that you reach out to them. Ladies, thank you for this opportunity to present with you. Thank you for this opportunity to sit here in my role at Innova Solutions as an executive leading the local team and being at a regional level. It is a privilege for you to speak to areas that I need you to speak to in IT. And it is fabulous to be here. Fabulous. Thanks so much again. Thanks to everyone who joined, who took the time to listen, to ask questions. Keep asking questions, keep plugging through, and don't give up. We must do this together for our country, for commerce, for trade, and by extension, our children and the people of Jamaica. Thank you so much for being here, and have a wonderful day.
Thanks for having me. Have a good evening.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Thanks for coming.
Bye, everyone. Bye, everyone.
Bye.